Hello and welcome to Witness. I'm Raghi Omar. Few countries on earth are so associated in the public mind with images of famine, chronic poverty and aid dependency as Ethiopia. I've lived in Ethiopia and reported from it many times over the last 15 years. It's changed for the better in many ways, but its rural economy is still weak and vulnerable to the cyclical droughts which affect the Horn of Africa roughly every decade. The last severe drought was in 2002. Ethiopian farmers were once again caught in the dreadful cycle of having to sell their cattle before they died and then being left with no livestock for future harvests or food supplies. The television cameras come when things are at their worst, but by then it's too late and aid agencies are reduced to making emergency appeals for money. It's a system which has bred aid dependency and donor fatigue amongst wealthy nations. Insuring Against Famine tells the story of an unlikely man using an unlikely approach, the tools of capitalism, to help some of the world's poorest people.
It's something we're used to. Pictures of Africans made destitute and desperate by drought, displayed on our TV screens to raise money. Weeks later, the funds are forthcoming. Months later, the aid arrives and people receive what they need to survive. The United Nations has tried to address this over the years, but UN agencies like the World Food Programme have been operating in the same way for decades. But change is in the air. Richard Wilcox is out to shake it up. He was a member of Bill Clinton's administration and was invited into WFP with the aim of blowing a fresh wind of commercialism and financial discipline into the business.
The big idea behind this project is financing, humanitarian financing. Until we really started this project in sort of its first incarnations about two years ago, the entire aid industry worked on one business model, which is you wait for a crisis to happen, you try to forecast it and anticipate as best as you can, but then when a crisis happens, you go out and assess the damage, you go out and ask for funds, and only when those funds become confirmed to you, essentially the donors give it to you, they either sign a contract or they move the cash into your bank accounts, then you start moving. And in so doing, we found that that's a very inefficient way of responding to disasters because people need the assistance right then when disaster strikes. So the solution to that is financing.
It's a $2 billion business, yet, he says, WFP financing is nothing but bookkeeping. He's gathered a team of economists around him to change that. All under 40, all with commercial financial experience, there's something quite new for WFP.
My name is Ulrich Hess. I'm Chief of Business Risk Planning at WFP. Previously I was with the World Bank with the Commodity Risk Management Group as Senior Economist.
My name is Yoshka Makino. I am a lawyer qualified in the UK and New York. My area of speciality is finance law, particularly in the field of project finance, asset finance and securitization.
I'm Joanna Soroka. I'm a quantitative strategist specializing in weather risk management.
Hey, Julie, the evaluation team is coming at 2?
Introducing radical new financial processes means Richard driving through new methods of working and shaking up the whole way people think about the jobs they do.
It's not on.
The team is into blue skies thinking, and they're experimenting with various financial techniques. Their latest radical idea is to insure Ethiopia's poor subsistence farmers on the international financial market. They want to take out a weather insurance policy on behalf of people in villages like Wajawashbula.
When our executive director took over in 2003, he challenged us to think through what sort of private sector analogies are relevant for WFP. What is this organization? Yes, we know it's an international organization, it's an aid organization. What does that mean? Are we a global logistics organization? Well, right, like UPS for the poor, right, or FedEx. Are we a project manager like Bechtel or another? Or are we an insurance company? And from a financial perspective, we really are an insurance company. We need to have funds ready in order to be effective when disaster strikes.
In Ethiopia, every 8 or 10 years, there's a calamitous drought that destroys millions of farmers' livelihoods and brings them and their families to the point of starvation. They can be left destitute for years. Richard has these people's livelihoods in his sights. At a hotel in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, local government and donor bigwigs have come to hear Richard explain how he hopes weather insurance will work. It starts from a very simple premise.
This line of reasoning essentially is we need to have funds available when they're needed by the beneficiaries and not when they're mobilized. And essentially in the past all we were able to do really in any large-scale form was to make funds available whenever we're able to mobilize them, which is obviously not the same time that the beneficiaries will need the support.
Early warning system a bit more, so to speak,
Ulrich Hess explains that the team plan to pilot the weather insurance project for 70 million farmers. He says that despite the UN presence on the ground, these farmers are still carrying the risk of disaster on their own shoulders.
We should be managing risks instead of managing crises. And I think this really sums it up. This is what where we are trying to help. Increase, upfront, a priori, again, smallholder productivity and resilience against drought.
Yoshiko Makino, the corporate lawyer, explains the weather derivative market. It's not well known as it's only been operating for 8 years and is still at the cutting edge of financial trading. It's a bit like high-stakes gambling.
It's a futures contract. It's because you are forming a contract today about something that might or that might not happen in the future. A farmer may want to take an insurance against lack of rain. On the other hand, for example, if you're a construction company and there's a lot of rain, you can't work, you make a loss, so then a construction company may want to insure your risk against too much rain. So what's interesting is there are lots of people out there with opposing risks that will balance the risk out.
But the farmers in Ethiopia face more than a fall in productivity or profit. Bad weather can mean mortal danger here. Some members of the audience are sceptical, but so far they're willing to look for the positive.
We are valuing the climate information in terms of money, and this is, for me, this is an advancement.
Farmers in villages like Wajawashbula are going to be in the pilot project. Hamu Waticha has 15 children. Like all farmers around here, he's regarded as relatively well off. He has 2 hectares of land, and with reasonable rainfall, his family can support itself.
With good rains, I can get 600 to 700 kilograms of grain each year. If there's less rain, then I get less grain.
Hamu knows he faces risks. He, like heads of families across the world, tries to insure himself and his family against them. He diversifies, spreading his assets, not just relying on his land. He keeps as many animals as he can. Farmers here don't have access to banks, so he buys livestock as a form of savings. He puts any extra income into his animals, which he can sell when times get hard. It's a form of insurance against crop failure. To further diversify in case of agricultural failure, he has a tiny shop that his wife runs to earn extra cash. But even this forward planning is not enough when the rains fail completely, as they did in 1984 and 2002.
In the 2002 drought, the cows died, and the cattle died, and the family went hungry. We got less than 200 kilograms from the land that year. When I realized the rains had failed, I sold my cattle and even my oxen, but the price was very low. I got less than 500 for my ox. But then the donors came and gave us food to eat.
These are the droughts that Richard is speaking of. Everyone in the area is affected, along with Hamu and his neighbour Dalu Waya. The value of livestock plummets as everyone tries to sell at the same time. If you don't sell, the animals die. But selling the oxen they'll need to plough the land once the rains return could leave these farmers completely destitute.
Before the drought, I had 10 different cattle. Because of the drought, some died and I sold the rest. Even up till now, I've only been able to get back 3 dairy cows and 1 ox. and one ox is not enough to plough. You need 2 oxen to plough.
It is exactly this downward spiral of continuing destitution that weather insurance should prevent. Hamu and his family would receive money immediately the rains fail, before they started suffering, as the insurance company would be contractually compelled to pay up.
Charity is a good thing, but it ultimately relies on us advertising other people's misery at their worst moments in order to motivate people to help them. If we can advertise them as productive human beings who have a future but who need help in dealing with shocks that have not yet occurred but will occur at some point in the future, then it's a much more dignified approach than using their misery to pass around the begging bowl later.
So the question is, can a developing country like Ethiopia enter the weather insurance market?
After the break, we'll be taking a closer look at this unconventional way of dealing with humanitarian disasters.